I moved into my home 23 years ago. The day I closed on the house, the realtor handed me the keys under the rustling branches of a massive oak that towered over the front yard. That tree had been there longer than anyone on the street. My neighbors told me it predated the neighborhood itself, well over 100 years old, according to a retired local historian 2 blocks down. My daughter used to play under it when she was little. We'd hang a tire swing from its lowest branch every summer, and on hot days, it cast a shade so wide it cooled half the lawn. I even named it Margaret, after my grandmother. Quiet, stubborn, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a tree, it was ours. That's why it felt like a slap in the face when the HOA sent me the first letter. Dear Mr. Donovan, the front yard tree at 143 Brookwood Lane violates current HOA landscaping regulations regarding visibility from the street. Please arrange for removal within 30 days to avoid further penalties. At first I thought it was a mistake. Margaret had been there long before the HOA was even formed. Surely they'd overlook their own policy for something this historic. I called them. It didn't go well. Melissa, the HOA president, the type of woman who wore pastel pantsuits and treated every meeting like it was a corporate merger, told me bluntly, "We're standardizing street aesthetics for the Brookwood expansion project. We need clean sight lines. Your tree's in the way." I pushed back, politely at first. "Melissa, that tree's a century old. It doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to this street. People love it." "I'm sure they do," she replied, brushing it off. "But it's not compliant. We gave you 30 days. She hung up. Over the next few weeks, I tried everything. I offered to trim it. I sent them photos showing that it didn't block any driver's view. I gathered signatures from 18 neighbors who supported keeping it. Melissa didn't care. She wanted the tree gone before the developers rolled in for Brookwood Phase 2, a shiny new row of townhouses that would wrap around our older cul-de-sac like a plastic necklace on a grandmother. By week 4, the fines started. $150. Then $300, then $750. I caved, not because I wanted to, but because they threatened a lien. I stood at the curb with my arms crossed as the chainsaws came. 3 guys in orange vests, 2 trucks, one horrifying sound as the first branch cracked and hit the ground. I didn't say a word. Not to the workers, not to Melissa, who drove by slowly in her SUV just to make sure it was happening. But I made a promise right then. You'll regret this. After the crew left, I spent the rest of the day sitting on the stump. My front yard looked naked, quiet, like it had been robbed. That night, I poured myself a glass of bourbon, opened my laptop, and started digging. What I found surprised me, not about Margaret. I already knew she was old, but about the land beneath her. Turns out, Brookwood Lane had once been part of a sprawling estate owned by a Civil War veteran, Colonel Henry L. Granger, a name I'd only vaguely recognized from the historical plaque downtown. And that estate? It had significance, not just as a family home, but as a site of early Reconstruction-era gatherings, including several community meetings that eventually led to one of the first African-American schools in the county. And guess where that old property line ended? Right at the edge of Melissa's upcoming townhouse development. By midnight, I had bookmarked every page I needed: county land records, historical registry guidelines, an archived city planning proposal from 1976, and a scanned copy of a forgotten application to the State Historic Preservation Office that was never completed. Melissa wanted to erase history for her sterile little expansion. I was about to do the opposite. The next morning, I called in sick to work, not because I was ill, but because I had a mission. Melissa and the HOA thought they'd buried my tree along with my pride, but they didn't realize something. I don't get angry. I get obsessed. I started by heading to the county records office. The woman at the front desk gave me that wary look like I was about to waste her morning with conspiracy theories. But when I mentioned Colonel Granger's name, her tone shifted. "Oh yeah," she said, typing rapidly. "That family used to own a huge chunk of Brookwood before the suburbs moved in." She pulled up a scan of an 1891 land deed. My house sat squarely in what had once been the Granger homestead. And more importantly, so did the land now designated for Brookwood Phase 2. "Is there anything historically protected on that land?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She shrugged. "Nothing official. A couple of folks tried to file back in the 70s, but it never went through. Might still be eligible, though." That was all I needed. By lunchtime, I was at the public library flipping through microfilm like it was the 1800s again. I found something that made my hands sweat. A newspaper article from 1902 titled, "Granger Oak to Shelter Freedmen's Forum." It included a blurry photo of people gathered beneath a giant oak tree. My oak tree. Margaret. That tree wasn't just old. It had been a meeting place for newly freed families and early educators working to build a school. It had witnessed something important. And now, it was mulch. That was when the idea hit me. A historical landmark designation. Not for my yard. That ship had sailed. But for the land behind it. The land the HOA was about to break ground on. Filing for a historical designation isn't a quick process, but it is powerful. If granted, it can freeze any development plans cold, and as I learned quickly, once an application is under review, the Planning Commission has to hold all permits, so I gathered everything, the 1891 deed, the 1902 article, the unfiled 1976 application, photos of the old oak before it was cut down. Thankfully, I'd taken plenty over the years. A signed letter from Mrs. Ellington, our 92-year-old neighbor who swore she remembered playing under that beautiful tree during summer picnics hosted by the Granger descendants. I submitted the full application to the State Historic Preservation Office. Certified mail, signature required, and then I waited. Exactly 9 days later, I got the first call. Hi, this is Brian from Marlowe Development. We're trying to finalize permit approval for Brookwood Phase 2, and something's come up about a historical review? I kept my voice level. Oh yeah, I filed for a historical designation on the property. Did the state not contact you yet? There was silence on the other end. You filed it now? Yep. Turns out the land has deep Reconstruction-era roots. The application's under review, which means your permits are frozen, correct? He tried to recover. This could delay construction by months. Shame about that, I said. Guess we should have all considered the history of the land before cutting down its oldest witness. By week 2, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. I showed up early and sat in the back row, arms crossed, not saying a word. Melissa saw me and practically hissed. We have a situation, she announced to the room. One of our residents has filed a historical designation that affects our expansion timeline. I raised my hand slowly. Correction. The resident filed the application after the HOA forced the removal of a historical tree. There's a difference. She tried to play it off, but people were already whispering. Board members glanced at each other. The developer was now threatening to pull funding unless the issue was resolved within 30 days. The same window they gave me to destroy something irreplaceable. Karma had finally RSVP'd. That night, Melissa emailed me directly. Mr. Donovan, we'd like to discuss a potential compromise that might help reverse the historical review process. I didn't respond. I was too busy preparing for the next step. Because while the HOA scrambled to find a way to undo history, I'd found something even better. A city council liaison who was running for re-election and desperate for good press. And guess what sounds great in campaign material? Preserving local black history, Brookwood's forgotten roots. The first time my phone rang with a reporter on the line, I thought it was a prank. Hi, Mr. Donovan. I'm with Channel 6 Local News. I heard you filed a historical landmark application that halted a new housing development. It turns out Councilwoman Price's team had already started pitching the story to the press, and when the media caught wind that a neighborhood's expansion plan might be paved over land tied to post-Civil War black education efforts, they swarmed. By the next morning, a camera crew stood on my dead lawn shooting footage in front of Margaret's stump. They aired archival photos I'd submitted in my application. The grainy black and white image of families gathered under the Granger oak, local kids reading books on the grass in the 1940s, and a 1970s rally for preserving Brookwood Green. And suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Melissa's HOA board started hemorrhaging support almost overnight. The same neighbors who had ignored the first tree dispute now posted online about how the HOA disrespected community history and acted without transparency. One particularly viral post had side-by-side photos. Left, the Granger oak in its prime. Right, a blank dirt patch surrounded by caution tape. Caption, they cut this down for a Starbucks and 6 gray townhomes? The city planning office paused all development permits pending the state's decision, which now, thanks to public outcry, had been bumped to expedited status. Melissa tried to fight back. She issued a statement through the HOA's official email. The HOA board regrets any distress caused and remains committed to enhancing our neighborhood through responsible development. It fell flat. Then came the real twist, and this one I didn't plan. An article from the Brookwood Gazette resurfaced from 1982, buried in a digital archive. It detailed how the original Granger land had nearly been recognized as a historical site back then, but the application was tabled due to budget cuts. And who was quoted in that article? A young intern from the Historical Preservation Committee who said, "This land deserves recognition. We'll revisit it someday, I promise." The intern's name? Eleanor Price, as in Councilwoman Eleanor Price. This wasn't just political anymore. It was personal. The next day, Price held a press conference on my lawn. "This neighborhood forgot where it came from, but we won't let history be erased just because someone wants a faster commute to Whole Foods." The crowd cheered. Melissa, I heard, nearly fainted. The HOA called an emergency vote. They tried to oust Melissa quietly behind closed doors. But news had already spread that the board's leadership had knowingly ordered the removal of a historic oak tree without a public hearing. Turns out, that violates HOA transparency policy and city code. A few days later, a motion passed to dissolve the entire board. You'd think that'd be enough for me, that I'd be satisfied watching Melissa carry a banker's box out of the HOA office, sunglasses on, mouth a tight line. But I wasn't done yet. I knew Marlowe Development wasn't going to back down unless someone hit them where it hurt. Their investors. So I sent a friendly packet to a few people on their board, including photos of the media coverage, quotes from community activists, the pending historical review, and a copy of the legal clause in their development charter that allows contract termination if construction is delayed beyond 90 days. I didn't get a reply. But I did hear rumors that Marlowe was considering relocating the project, that they were trying to negotiate buyouts of sensitive parcels, that Melissa had signed a non-disclosure agreement on her way out. Funny how fast priorities change when public image meets legal delays. The final straw came when a small bronze plaque was installed, temporarily, at the edge of the development zone. It read, "Future site under historical review, Granger Community Grounds. Pending state determination. Eastern 1902. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know they were making it. But it made everything worth it. Neighbors took photos with it. Parents explained it to their kids. And me? I stood by it quietly, with a coffee in one hand and a smirk I couldn't hide. Margaret was gone, but the history she represented wasn't. And I had made damn sure Melissa's little gray townhomes would never stand where she once did. It took 2 months for the official word to come down from the State Historic Preservation Office. I was out mowing the lawn, what was left of it, when I saw the envelope in my mailbox. Heavy paper, embossed seal. I didn't even make it back inside. I tore it open on the driveway, hands a little shaky. "Your application to designate the Granger Community Grounds as a historical site has been approved." Just one word, approved, and it was done. That meant Brookwood Phase 2 wasn't just paused. It was dead. The designation protected not just the patch of dirt behind my yard where they planned to pour concrete, but the entire expansion tract. The land would now require a full environmental and historical impact study before anything could be built, a process that could take years, if not decades. Melissa had wanted me to remove a tree. Instead, I'd planted something permanent, a legacy. The reaction from the HOA, what was left of it, was almost comical. The interim board, mostly quiet neighbors who'd been too scared to speak up under Melissa, called me in for a discussion. They wanted to know if I'd consider working with the HOA moving forward, maybe even joining the board myself. I politely declined. "Thanks," I said, "but I think I've done enough governing for one lifetime." Instead, I agreed to help set up a community memorial. We raised money for a new historical marker. Something proper this time, not just a temporary plaque. Bronze, concrete base, an engraving of the Granger oak with the inscription, "Here stood the Granger oak, where freedom was once organized under its branches, cut down in haste, remembered in permanence." The dedication ceremony was surreal. People brought old photos. One elderly woman, Ms. Ellington, who had written me the letter for the application, spoke to a crowd of nearly 50 about how she'd played there as a child and taught reading circles under that very tree. The mayor showed up. So did a local historian. So did Channel 6 again. The footage made the evening news. As for Melissa, last I heard, she moved to a town 2 counties over, into a development with no HOA. A little ironic, considering she spent the last 10 years making rules for everyone else. Marlowe Development quietly sold the land back to the city at a loss. The council, backed by Councilwoman Price, voted to turn the now protected land into a public park, Granger Memorial Green. So the land wouldn't hold condos, it would hold families, benches, shade trees, maybe even a new oak or two. It wasn't revenge in the petty sense. I didn't ruin anyone's life. I didn't slash tires or scream at board meetings. I just did what the tree would have done if it could. V stood firm. Sometimes I walk past the stump where Margaret once stood. I left it in the ground, didn't grind it down, let moss grow over it. Kids sit on it now like it's a bench. One even called it the memory seat. I didn't correct him. My daughter came to visit recently. She's older now, married, living 2 states away. She stood in the yard and teared up a little. "I can't believe they made it a historical site," she said. I just smiled. "Believe it," I told her. "The tree's gone, but the story's rooted deeper than ever. And in the end, that's what revenge really is. Not destruction, but preservation." The HOA tried to erase history for a shortcut, so I turned their shortcut into a dead end.